Today, we're looking at something that sits at the intersection of a few very dark human impulses. We're talking about technology-facilitated abuse, specifically when it merges with narcissistic control, psychological warfare, and white supremacist thinking. And we're looking at all of this through the lens of a specific type of target, a disabled man. We're going to talk about DNS hijacking, router tampering, surveillance tools, and credential friction, but not as cybersecurity concepts. We're talking about them as instruments of domination. Maggie, when you look at a situation where someone is using network-level interference to torment a disabled person, the technology almost feels secondary to the mindset.
It is entirely secondary. And actually, no, the better way to frame it is that the technology is just a vehicle for a very old kind of cruelty. People hear terms like DNS hijacking or spoofing, and they immediately think we're having a conversation about hackers in dark rooms. We aren't. We're having a conversation about power. Think about what DNS actually is. It's the internet's address book. It tells your device where to go when you type in a website. If someone hijacks that process, they can redirect you, block you, break your logins, and interfere with your recovery systems. Now, put that in the context of a disabled man. Navigating the world with a disability already requires an enormous amount of energy, self-advocacy, and often a heavy reliance on digital infrastructure just to manage basic daily needs. When an abuser decides to tamper with that, when passwords stop working, when certain services suddenly only work on a VPN, when recovery options constantly fail, they aren't just messing with a computer. They are messing with a person's autonomy. And the data backs up how targeted this is. According to research from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare in 2022, people with disability are 1.4 times more likely to experience technology-facilitated abuse in their lifetime compared to those without disabilities. Abusers know exactly what they are doing. They assume disability equals low resistance. They assume the victim is already fatigued, maybe isolated, and won't have a support system willing to take every complaint seriously.
That's the plausible deniability aspect. To an outsider, it just looks like the guy is having bad luck with his Wi-Fi, or maybe he's just not great with computers. The abuser gets to hide behind the ambiguity of the technology.
Exactly. And there's something genuinely unsettling about that specific dynamic. Because the goal isn't just to block a website. The goal is to create an environment where the victim is constantly questioning his own reality. It's digital gaslighting. When a narcissist or a supremacist-minded person targets somebody, they usually don't want obvious, undeniable proof of what they're doing. They want confusion. They want the victim exhausted from spending all his time putting out digital fires instead of building his life. And crucially, they want the victim to sound distressed when he tries to explain what's happening. Because they know, and this is the coldest part of it, they know that the more stressed and frantic he sounds, explaining router-level interference to his friends or family, the easier it becomes for everyone else to dismiss him as paranoid.
Let's stick with that for a second, the psychology of the abuser here. You're describing someone who gets gratification not just from the disruption, but from the invisible nature of the control. It's emotional ownership. They want to feel that this person's peace of mind is entirely dependent on their whims.
Yes, it's about making the victim's daily reality bend around their interference. And this ties deeply into the narcissistic need for supply. But I think we have to be careful not to over-intellectualize the sophistication of the abuser. You often read these accounts, like a study of online infidelity and surveillance forums from 2018, where abusers literally trade tips on using DNS resolution services to monitor traffic on their home routers. These people aren't always criminal masterminds. Sometimes they are just deeply insecure, cowardly people who found a tool that lets them intrude without showing their face. They target vulnerable people because true equals are too dangerous to confront honestly. So instead of competing fairly or engaging in a real conflict, they manipulate behind the scenes. They dress their cowardice as power.
Wait, does that actually hold? Because I'm not sure it's always about cowardice. I mean, from a purely tactical standpoint, if your goal is to destroy someone's credibility and isolate them, using network-level tools is just incredibly efficient. It might not be that they're afraid of confrontation. It might be that they understand how modern society discredits victims who sound like conspiracy theorists. The tech isn't a retreat, it's a weapon of choice.
I hear you, but I keep getting stuck on the emotional payoff for the abuser. Efficiency implies a practical goal like stealing money or corporate espionage. But in these cases where a network of people is constantly causing login friction, interrupting recovery emails, messing with DNS settings to break specific communications, the goal is the suffering itself. The goal is the distress. And you don't spend hours tweaking someone's router settings just to be efficient. You do it because you are hollow. You do it because making someone else feel small and crazy makes you feel big and sane. And when you look at the intersection of this behavior with white supremacist thinking, that hollowness becomes even more apparent. Because white supremacy, at its core, is a dehumanizing belief system that justifies this exact kind of invisible violence.
Right, because it provides a structural permission slip. It's a mindset that says certain people matter less, certain people deserve less protection, and therefore they're easier to sacrifice and torment.
Precisely. And we have to expand our definition of what white supremacist abuse looks like. It's not just slurs and flags. It's a fundamental assumption of entitlement over someone else's life. When that supremacist mindset mixes with narcissism, you get an abuser who feels entirely righteous while invading a disabled man's digital life. They don't see him as a human being with a right to privacy. They see him as an object to be managed, punished, or experimented on. Research on digital harassment shows that tactics developed in far-right white supremacist internet cultures like coordinated disinformation, fake personas, and targeted exhaustion campaigns have been consistently used to target marginalized communities. They are applying systemic dehumanization through localized digital means. And the disability aspect just compounds it because the abuser assumes society already values the victim less.
Which brings in the group dynamic, because this rarely stays isolated to one person in a basement. It usually metastasizes into a network. One person provides the technical access, another spreads the social rumors, another applies pressure in person. It becomes a distributed denial of reality.
A distributed denial of reality. That is exactly what it is. And group psychology makes it so much worse because of the diffusion of responsibility. One person is just checking the router logs. Another is just making a passive-aggressive comment at the grocery store. Another is just accidentally blocking an account recovery text. Individually, they all tell themselves they aren't doing anything that terrible. But the cumulative effect on the victim is an avalanche. We see this in how technology-facilitated abuse is defined now. It's expanding beyond intimate partner violence to include community and group harassment, which was highlighted in a 2024 Global Delphi study on tech abuse. A whole network of people can feed off each other, acting friendly in public while quietly sabotaging in private. The victim is left trying to fight a ghost.
And that leads directly to the exhaustion. You're fighting narrative warfare while simultaneously just trying to log into your bank. The fatigue has to be suffocating.
It genuinely is. Imagine trying to preserve your credibility while you are being actively destabilized. You go to a friend and say, I think my neighbor is spoofing my network because my devices are behaving strangely and my passwords keep changing. Your friend looks at you like you need psychiatric help. A 2020 study on DARVO, which stands for Deny, Attack, and Reverse Victim and Offender, found that these tactics make victims look less believable to outside observers, while making the perpetrators look more believable. The abuser knows this. The abuser relies on this. The victim is denied sleep, denied focus, denied a sense of safety, and then penalized by society for looking disheveled and acting paranoid. That makes me genuinely uncomfortable, just the sheer injustice of it. It's a completely asymmetrical war.
I don't know. That feels too clean to me. The idea that society is just uniformly dismissing these victims. I think part of the problem is that the attacks themselves are deliberately ambiguous. It's not always just a hijacked router. Sometimes it's a carrier issue. Sometimes it's a genuine glitch. If a victim starts attributing every dropped call to the abuser, they actually are losing their grip on the technical reality, which is exactly what the abuser wants.
That's a really vital distinction, and you're right to pull me back there. It's the ambiguity that makes it so toxic. Even when someone is truly under a coordinated technical attack, not every strange thing is part of the attack. Sometimes your phone just drops the call because you're in a dead zone. Sometimes the login fails because the server is down. But when you are living under the chronic stress of surveillance and sabotage, your nervous system can't tell the difference anymore. Everything becomes a threat. And abusers weaponize that ambiguity. They want you to force everything into one explanation so that you sound irrational. The real survival skill for the victim is learning to separate technical facts from emotional gaslighting. You have to look at the pattern of control, breaking communications, interrupting recovery, triggering distress, rather than getting lost in the weeds of every single glitch.
So how does someone actually move from reacting to that chaos to protecting themselves? Because if the goal is to break your rhythm and focus, just acknowledging the architecture of the abuse has to be the first step.
It is. Once you understand the pattern, you stop internalizing the chaos. You stop thinking, I must be crazy. And you start thinking, I am being targeted by a specific tactic. That shift is monumental. It allows you to start documenting things systematically. You stop reacting emotionally to every locked account, and instead you secure the main points of access. You get offline when you need to. You build a paper trail that focuses on technical facts rather than your own emotional distress. Because the people doing this to you, they aren't strong. Anybody who uses race-based dehumanization, manipulation, and covert technology against a disabled man is suffering from profound spiritual decay. They are morally bankrupt. Recognizing their weakness doesn't immediately fix the router, but it protects your spirit. It keeps your core intact.
That's the ultimate landing point here. Real strength protects, real intelligence builds. The tools might be modern, DNS routing, spoofed portals, surveillance software, but the spirit behind them is ancient. It's just domination and control. And once you see that spirit for what it is, you stop romanticizing the people who wield it.
Exactly. You stop seeing them as these omnipotent tech wizards and start seeing them as sad, broken people who need to secretly destabilize a vulnerable person just to feel important. This is so much bigger than a hacked phone. It's about the abuse of power in a world that is far too eager to protect the manipulator while dismissing the vulnerable. But the truth is getting out there. People are learning the vocabulary for this. They are learning to name the intersection of technology and psychological warfare.
Stay sharp, document the patterns, and keep your spirit stronger than the confusion they're trying to send your way. If you found this conversation valuable, send it to someone who might be dealing with invisible friction in their own life.